I'm the Managing Director of Veritas in Australia, and I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Hay, who's the Executive Director of Cultural Cybersecurity. And we're going to pick up on one word that was talked about in the previous segment, and that word is human, because we're going to talk an awful lot about technology through the balance of today's session. But let's just drill down a little bit on that word human. And Brian, I guess the best place to start is, with this pervasive nature of ransomware and all of those statistics that we saw, are organizations able to profile or have a perspective on the human that's going to be operating that ransomware event into their organization?
No, Peter, and thank you to Veritas and yourself for inviting me along this morning. It's impossible to focus on profiling the cyber attacker, but what you can do is profile their methodologies and understand how are they likely to come after your organization. You can profile your organization as a state of preparedness, and if we can understand their tactics, their techniques, and their procedures, then we can proactively apply that to our environments, which then leads us to a greater state of preparation, prevention, and defense. And of course, mitigation of harm and risk should they actually get through.
That's fantastic, because the interesting thing when you talk about getting through, I think you'd agree with me that with all of the best technology prevention in the world, the weakest link in preventing a ransomware event remains the human in that chain. And the human will just do something that they think is legitimate and open that door for that ransomware attacker to get through. And perhaps in the current economy that we're in with the COVID pandemic, there's been an interesting event that's happened. And we did a poll. Many of you participated in a poll, and we asked you whether your organization is collecting coronavirus vaccination certificates. And a whopping 64% of you said, yes, your organization has asked you to send in your coronavirus certificate. Well, that poses two interesting things. One, how does the person receiving the coronavirus certificate know that it's you sending it in? So there's a new door that could be coming into your organization where someone they think is a legitimate coronavirus certificate coming through into the organization, number one. But number two, aren't these things packed full of personally identifiable information, Brian, that organizations should be treating the same way as a credit card or a driver's license or passport, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. What we don't understand is the intrinsic connectivity that sits behind and the data that's available to prove that vaccination certificate is legitimate. So in some countries, and it may link back to your. In Australia, for example, your MyGov account, that links to your superannuation, that links to your taxation records, that links to your My Health records. So it's a significant gateway into an enormous amount of PII information. And organisations need to think very clearly how they secure, store that sort of information, because there's one thing we know about crooks is they're very brilliant at discerning sensitive information, where it sits and how to exploit it. So that's, if they get access to that sort of those sorts of records, that's a gold mine for the crooks.
And that gold mine is not just against the organization, but against the individual concerned. I'm assuming that the ransom isn't just something that they could be focusing on the organization, but could be focusing on the individual humans inside that organization.
That's right. What we know, in Australia, we saw the first ransomware attacks occur in about September 2013, and they've constantly changed their procedures, and they've become more sophisticated, more complex. We know now that they have been exfiltrating data for some period of time, and that's where the personal issue is going to come to the fore. We've seen, situations where it wasn't clearly their intent, but it did instill a lot of fear, where we saw a loss of life when a ransomware attack hit a German hospital, and a patient had to be transported because they couldn't function to provide that treatment and care. And unfortunately, and sadly and tragically, she died en route to the hospital she was being transported to. We've seen situations where medical records have been compromised, and they've then gone after to extort money from those individual personal patients who had disclosed incredibly sensitive information. The whole purpose of ransomware, of course, is to make money. And criminals sit in an ecosystem. The other way they make money is to generate for additional income by selling that data to other crooks. So organizations need to critically understand that if you lose data as part of the data exfiltration process in a ransomware attack, that is a legacy that potentially can haunt you and the PII information, that personal information for those entities whose data was taken, for more than a decade to come, because it will be continued to be sold and traded amongst criminals.
That's quite amazing, which leads me to the next point, which is humans are going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes, and it's important not to blame the human. But one of the other polls that we did was similar to DR. Have you actually tested your plan or your recovery to a ransomware attack versus a traditional DR type of test? And the same percentage number, but this time the wrong way around. So 64% of you on this call, those who participated, said no, you haven't actually tested your capability to survive a ransomware attack. Now, I would suggest that's a people and process problem, not a technology and enablement problem, Brian.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, even though we've been talking about ransomware and it's been around a long time and it's certainly escalated, there's still a lot of ignorance around what ransomware is and how it affects an organization. And they're still not understanding the legacy of what it means to actually be subjected to a ransomware attack. And I remember seeing something just recently and it was actually came from the words of an interview with a ransomware gang member. And they actually stipulated in this interview that organizations have not stepped up to increase the investment in cybersecurity and the appropriate programs of defense, notwithstanding the fact that their attacks have gone through the roof in the last 18 months. So is it because of the economy? Is it because of COVID-19? Or are they still in a state of shock? They don't know how to approach it.
Yeah, and just concluding this bit before we move on to our next topic, Brian, because humans are fallible and processes aren't always complete, which is effectively what those two last statistics told us. And organizations are asking for, and the humans are responding to sending in coronavirus certificates. If you were an organization and you needed to prove that people were vaccinated, or it was a requirement for you to confirm that they were vaccinated, how would you recommend that organizations deal with this particular situation in our economy where coronavirus certificates are becoming, or vaccination certificates, more to the point, are becoming so pervasive to conduct normal life?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we've got to understand also is that most people do the right thing, and most people are striving to be compliant, and most people will provide an authentic vaccination certificate. But there will be others who will try to get around that situation, and they'll produce fake vaccination certificates. But it's not for the motivation of trying to leave the organisation in a vulnerable position. But what I'd say, I know some organisations, they do not want to take possession of that PII data. They do not want the certificates in their possession because they understand the personal risks and the organisational risks and the expectations then of having how to treat and hold that data, and how attractive it will be to cyber criminals. So what they're doing is having the staff member, present a copy, not to provide it to their manager, but simply so it can be cited for the purpose of, yes, I'll tick you off, you've got it. Note on the record for the purpose of the HR file that was presented on this date. It appeared to be valid as best I could validate it. And you know what? If a couple got through that wasn't quite right, well, that'll come out in the wash down the track, but don't jeopardize the whole organization. It's not going to jeopardize the whole organization from a security perspective, but it will lessen the attractiveness as a target. Because even though we said at the beginning, you can't target and profile a criminal, they are constantly targeting and profiling you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the interesting things that you can do to remediate the human frailty in the cyber security and ransomware chain is, of course, to train them. So the last question that we asked you in the poll before you joined today was, do you conduct training? And this is great. 76% of you said absolutely. Absolutely. We have an education program in place, and we are teaching our people to be email phishing aware and to not pick up USB sticks and plug them into your computer, and to make sure that you log on onto a secure Wi-Fi, all those sorts of things that they're teaching in these training courses. Do you think that's really building a culture of cybersecurity awareness, Brian, or do you think we're seeing people doing something because they have to do it versus ingraining it inside the way they run their business?
Yeah, Pete, that's a great question. What I would default to is that organizations may have an annual, once a year, 10-minute online training module, and therefore, from a compliance perspective, they tick the box, they've got a training program. I spend my days going into organizations and building culture programs. So awareness by itself is not enough. And I'll give you a very quick example of awareness versus culture. Say a police officer does the wrong things, makes a poor operational decision on the day. And there was an example recently where a police officer let a fellow police officer from an interstate who was on holidays continue and not be held to account for a drink driving offence. Now, that officer admitted they did the wrong thing, and they were well aware of what they should do. However, culturally, the police culture of protecting police at all cost did not override. I'm really stuffing this up. The culture of protecting police overrode the awareness of what they should do, which is proper. And that's a classic case where people may be aware, but what is the organizational culture? So where we've got to get to is that culture and cyber safety and cybersecurity is absolutely tied at the hip. And it's intrinsic with people, because when we go into organizations, we do cultural diagnostics. I can assure you that most people in organizations don't know and are not familiar with their cybersecurity policy. Their skills at detecting phishing emails, they would rate themselves 6 to 7 out of 10. They have no confidence in that space, and they actually don't know what to do in the times of a critical event. So we cannot continue under this threat landscape to have a compliance be our ceiling and where it should be our floor. That's a starting point to get an online annual program of training in place. You need to migrate and accelerate far beyond that if you want to be effective and actually have a primary defense against ransomware, because we know about 90% of ransomware attacks start with a compromised individual.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of the reasons that we like working with you, Brian, and introducing you to our clients so that they can complete that story or that framework where we stop as an organization. We're fantastic at the protection and recovery from ransomware. We're very proud of our 100% recovery record for our clients who are on a full Veritas stack. But stopping it to start is a far better strategy than having a remediation only strategy inside your business, which is what we're going to be talking about in the balance of the event. So, Brian, I'd like to thank you for your time. It's always great talking to you and getting a different perspective on what too many of us consider to be a technology-based solution only. And absolutely, you've got to look at both sides of the equation, which starts with understanding the human behavior that causes the ransomware event to start in the first place, generally speaking. So thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you very much. It was a privilege to be a part of it. Thank you.
Like always. Cheers.